5,546 agonizing days have passed since the family of young Timothy Pitzen were delivered the worst possible news. Timothy is safe. He is with people who will care and love for him, and you will never find him. That was a quote from the chilling and bewildering letter that was left behind after 6-year-old Timothy Pitzen went missing, and the letter written by his own mother, Amy Fry-Pitzen, a woman who was found dead in a hotel room just days later. Yet her son Timothy was nowhere to be seen. And as the police started to search for the young boy, the case grew stranger and stranger. And despite Amy's possessions being found, none of Timothy's were. And after being spotted on numerous CCTV cameras hand in hand with her son over the days in question, the police would make a shocking discovery when they find CCTV footage of Amy entering a store without Timothy. How could a mother trick her own child into believing that he was going on a 3-day spontaneous vacation filled with fun, laughter, and memories that could have lasted a lifetime, only to take her own life and to take the secret of what happened to young Timothy to the grave with her? Or did she? Because in 2019, a bruised, distressed, and disorientated boy approached a driver in Kentucky, USA, and asked him for help. He claimed he had escaped from 2 men that had held him captive, and it just so happened that his name was Timothy Pitzen, which was music to the ears of his poor father, Jim Pitzen, a man who had spent nearly a decade searching for answers. So would this be the happy ending, or would this event leave us with more questions than answers as to what happened to America's most well-known missing child, Timothy Pitzen?
In this episode, we will be discussing the true story of a missing boy who very much may still be out there. But before we get into the story, I do just want to say that we will be discussing themes in this episode around self-deletion and also mental health struggles. If you're suffering with anything like this, there will be some resources in the description and a link that you can click to seek help. Remember, you are not alone and there is always support there for you if you need it. Right, so let's start the story off with telling you a little bit more about who the Pitzens were. Because the thing is that to neighbours and people that knew the Pitzen family, they were a very normal suburban family who lived in a place called West Aurora in Illinois. And on a road called North Highland Avenue, Jim Pitzen and his partner Amy Pitzen lived. And in October 2004, the couple welcomed a little baby boy into the world who they named Timothy. Now, the couple had met just 2 years earlier when Jim went to visit a sort of going away party, and that person ended up actually being Amy. The couple got on straight away and they really had a good time together. So much so that they started a relationship together, which was immediately a long distance relationship. And they continued doing that long distance relationship for over a year. And what this meant is that Jim had to do a 5.5-hour drive every few weeks just to see the person that he fell in love with. Now, when they first got together, a lot of people, or the friends that knew them, said that they were very different people. I don't know if you've ever heard this, Joey. Basically, Amy was said to be like a really smart person, very outgoing, a really avid reader as well. She was well known as sort of being that sort of like hyper intelligent person in the community, as well as being very outgoing. Whereas Jim was known as a sort of a bit more of a sort of like average guy. Like, he wasn't very talkative per se. He often enjoyed his own company, but also he was out there just doing blokey things, right? He was out there sort of like fixing up cars and like trying to get on with his life, go to work, do very normal things. So they started their relationship and people were sort of like, are they really suited for each other? Do they really get on? Are they compatible? But the thing is they definitely were, because they got on so well straight away. And they did, as we said, this whole massive long distance thing. And you know yourself, Joey, long distance doesn't work.
It doesn't really work, to be honest with you. But eventually, obviously, they would move closer together. And the one thing that I would say is Jim definitely had that commitment. So if he was driving 5.5 hours or whatever it was to go and see Amy, listen, there's a reason why they say that opposites attract. I think it's very much true. I look at a lot of relationships. I wouldn't want to be with someone that's exactly like me. Would you want to be with the carbon copy of yourself?
Definitely not. I mean, it would make going to the football a little bit easier, wouldn't it?
That would, yeah. Football and beers, but apart from that, nothing else.
Yeah, so you can understand it. And look, a lot of the relationships that we see out there are very similar. But it's very interesting when you go back into the start of their relationship and you find out a little bit more about what was going on at the time. So Jim actually had a really horrible time before he actually got into this relationship. He was suffering and recovering, I should say, from cancer. He had a cancer called Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is actually a very serious cancer. So he was very lucky to even be alive. And doctors said after that he had gone through this illness and managed to come out the other side, they said that he might never be able to have kids. Basically, they said to him that he was infertile. He wasn't actually probably able to conceive naturally. And so he very much sort of like made peace with this and sort of went, I'm never going to have kids and that's just going to be my life.
I actually think the only wording there that I would change is probably. I think they pretty much certainly told him, like, you ain't going to have kids. And obviously, listen, I think a lot of the time doctors will prepare you for the worst, hope for the best type thing. But as far as I'm aware, it wasn't even really like a pipe dream to have kids in a way for Jim. It wasn't something that he thought was realistic.
And this is the thing, like, bear in mind, Jim would have said this very early on in the relationship, you know, because it's a very big thing. And obviously, if people want, you know, the other person in the relationship wants to have kids, it's the sort of thing you want to immediately sort of identify and have that conversation quite early on. They very much got together and they basically said, yeah, look, we've made peace with this. We might not never have kids. And that's just the start of our relationship. But just over a year into their relationship, a miracle happened. I've heard this described several times as a miracle. Amy did, in fact, fall pregnant. And the couple saw this as a bit of a sign that they were destined to be together. So in May 2004, when Amy was 4 months pregnant, the couple got married in a very simple outdoor park ceremony. And soon after that, they went to go and live in West Aurora in Illinois, as we've said earlier on. And they actually started working for Amy's father, who owned sort of like a commercial real estate business. And they both worked in that business together.
So it was Jim that upped and left his place where he was and he travelled to Amy.
Exactly that. Yeah. So basically he moved his entire life, as we said, 5.5 hours away, and started the relationship with her. And on October the 18th, 2004, Timmothy Pitzen was born. He was named after Amy's brother, who very sadly died at birth. Amy then used the Timothy name, but spelled it slightly differently with a double M to make it unique to her brother while still remembering his memory.
I read as well that they wanted to spell Timothy different to any other spelling of the name because his conception was completely different. They felt that it was so special that they wanted to give him something that made his name a little bit more special, and that's why they spelt it with the two M's.
So that's so true. And look, I think both of them had gone for a really tough time before Timothy was born. And I think Amy herself was really struggling. And I think when the moment that he was born, she looked into his eyes and I felt she had a joy that she hadn't otherwise had for a very long time.
A purpose, maybe.
And this is the thing. I think she very much started, to take care of him straight away. And he was a light in her life. I don't think you can say anything other than that. And she became a very dutiful mother. She was absolutely infatuated in love with this boy. And it pretty much, I don't think you can over-egg this, it changed her life, I would say. And there was a reason why she fell so in love with Timothy. And that's because he was a wonderful young kid. He was super bright. He was really energetic. And he was a very fun-loving young little boy.
He couldn't even take a bad photo, could he?
No, he couldn't.
Every picture you look at Timmothy Pitzen and he looks like he's having the time of his life. And even when we go into the case and that and we're looking at CCTV images and stuff, Timothy Pitzen was a fun-loving kid.
He was. And look, we've all seen like the home footage. Like he was riding his bicycle outside. He was playing with his toy cars all the time. Very much sort of like a standard young kid, having a great time, living a great life. And from what you can see from the outside, when you look at that home footage, everything seems rosy, right? So much so that he was actually out in the garden. Jim, obviously, as I say, was fixing up cars. And Timothy had his own go-kart, which I would have been incredibly jealous of when I was his age. But he was out in the garden doing freaking donuts outside on the front lawn. I would have only dreamed of having a go-kart.
Do you know what my dream was?
Go on.
Do you remember when you used to watch like American TV shows and that, and they had the go-kart beds? Like the kids' beds that were like go-karts.
Oh my God. Yeah, or a sofa or something like that. Yeah. That was crazy.
I used to think that was like the coolest thing imaginable.
Just to clarify, Timothy didn't have a go-kart bed. No. He did have a very cool go-kart, which his dad sort of limited himself so he couldn't cause himself too much damage. And again, he was just out there in the garden having a wonderful time. And Jim loved Timothy so much, as well as Amy, that their house was covered with pictures of the family. And Jim was also super protective of his son, teaching him how to stay safe and ultimately live a happy life. But you see, the thing is, beneath the surface, the life of the Pitzen family was not all rosy. And in fact, there was plenty more going on that we only just started to learn about.
And we see this a lot, Josh, don't we? Families look like they're having the perfect time from the outside. It's the ideal dynamic and everything looks rosy. But when you scratch beneath the surface, like anyone in life, you're going to find out that people do have struggles. People do have problems. And Amy in particular, I'm going to say had lived a lot of life before she met Jim Pitzen. And that life had involved a fair amount of struggle. She grew up in a middle-class family in Chicago. She was described as smart and outgoing, like you say, but at the same time, she did always have depressive tendencies, is what some around her have said. She went to high school, university, did quite well, graduated, got a degree. Not long after that, in the early 90s, I haven't actually got a specific date for you, but I couldn't find it. Yeah. But in the early 90s, she marries for the first time.
Wait a second, did you say the first time? She was married multiple times.
For the first time, because Amy had been married 3 times before the age of 30.
Wow.
I've always had this perception, I could well be wrong, right? Yeah. We've got some American friends that we could very easily ask. But I have always had this perception. My uncle moved over to America when he was about 21 or something like that. And he's now in his 60s living there. And obviously he's got a wife and stuff like that. We know their kids, we know their families, wider families, know a lot of people. I have always had this perception that in America, kids do settle down and get married a lot younger. So in the times when, I don't know, I'd have been in nightclubs drinking and stuff like that, in America, I do find that a lot of people that would have been that same age as me, 21, 22, stuff like that, were settling down, getting married, starting families. And therefore, maybe you might describe 3 marriages as not too out of the ordinary, but I'm going to be completely honest with you here. I think that there's a pattern there if you've been married 3 times before the age of 30.
Well, that's the thing. I actually looked the statistics up of this, Joey.
Oh.
So I looked at the United States, how many people have been married 4 times or more, because she was married 4 total times.
I can give you one, Ross Geller.
There you go, Ross Geller. Yep. Good character to bring in here. Yep.
Sorry.
What would you think the rate is in percentages of people that have had over 4 or more marriages in the United States?
Or under the age of 30 or of any age?
Just generally.
Oh God, you'd think it'd be well low. Was it 2%?
This is the thing. It was between 1% and 2%.
Yeah.
The data that I saw. But by the way, you saying that's really low, that's like tens of millions of people when you think about it, because they've got a population of 330 million plus.
Gotcha.
That's a lot of that's a lot of people. So I was very surprised with that figure. Now I looked at the UK. I thought the UK would be less than it was. The UK is actually only 0.5%. So it shows you the difference between the UK and the US. So your hypothesis of people getting married earlier, potentially having more marriages in the United States, would very much marry up to that. But I have to say, as you pointed out rightly there, under the age of 30 to have 4 marriages, it's a lot of marriages. And again, a lot of scope to say things have gone wrong, this hasn't been right, there's something else going on here.
Listen, it can sound insensitive, but normally in life you try and look at pattern recognition.
Yeah.
And if someone has had 3 marriages, there's clearly a tendency to potentially rush in to a marriage, to potentially not get to know someone well enough, or to potentially have your character change over time, or that partner learn about your character. Now, listen, Amy could have left those 3 partners of hers. It could have been off her own accord. We don't know that. We don't have the available information. I would say it's strange, albeit it's not mind-blowing or anything like that. One of the reasons why the marriages may or may have not worked would have definitely, in my opinion, been due to Amy's mental health struggles. It was reported that she had attempted to unalive herself at least twice during these 3 marriages and had suffered with constant depression during the years. And although very little is actually known about these first 3 marriages, one thing I can tell you for sure is that Amy stayed in contact with the man from her first marriage. And that contact lasted even once she had met and become an item with Jim Pitzen. And Amy was open and transparent with Jim Pitzen about her mental health struggles, about her previous attempts to unalive herself, but she wasn't honest about the relationship that she still had with her former partner. And in 2003, Jim receives a phone call from the hospital. Amy had seriously attempted to take her own life, where she had taken a potentially lethal dosage of pills and had then fallen off a cliff. And Amy's recovery was one where she had the constant support of her partner, Jim. He stuck by her. He made sure that she had what she needed and she had the support. And after that, as I say, Timothy was welcomed in to the world. It ended up going from a bit of a dark time for Amy into a time where she did have so much more to be happy about. For a few years, it really did seem to those around them like things had worked out for Amy, like she had turned a corner. Did she still suffer from depressive episodes? Yes, she did. But as I say, she now had a focus. She had a purpose in life, and it was definitely one in her son Timothy that gave her so much more optimism for the future. But then after a few years, the friction really starts to build and begin between the couple. A lot of this stems down to the fact that it was reported that Amy wanted to go on a lot of solo vacations on her own with friends. They never included Jim or Timothy in those plans. And Jim was actually quite hurt by this some of the time because, you know, to put yourself in Jim's shoes, Josh, you'd have absolutely no problem with your missus going on a girl's holiday, would you?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. Completely fine.
Neither would I. Neither would I. If she started, I'm just being open and transparent here. Shoot me down if you want. I've got 2 kids at home, right? Even when I just had the one, even when I just had my little girl, if she started wanting to do it multiple times per year, I would probably say, listen, babe, we've got financial struggles here, which the couple did, okay? I am a dad. I can't be doing this all the time on my own. And I think personally, my personal standpoint would be, I would kind of want to be either doing those holidays as a family more often than the odd, listen, nothing wrong with the odd hen do trip away with the girls, but it was reported that this was becoming something that was happening on numerous times.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like 1 or 2 little trips away with your close mates is absolutely normal and fine. But again, if you've got a family at home and you're trying your best to look after them and want to spend time with them, especially a young boy, you know, looking after them, you do want to go on a family holiday together. That's completely normal. So yeah, I can understand why Jim, felt like he was being a little bit put out and not looked after.
I can definitely understand it, because one of the main reasons which Amy was saying she needed these holidays is she needed to clear her mind. And therefore, I know this is a very simplistic way of looking at life, but I would want you to come back from the holiday with a clear mind after that, to be honest. If I've just looked after the kid for a week and whatever, it's very hard, you know what I mean? But the reports are that Amy, much like a lot of people would, to be fair, would come back from these trips and
holiday blues.
She would have the holiday blues. She would be down, and it would mean that all of a sudden maybe Jim thought that he would be able to have a little bit more time on his hands to be doing his work and other things like that. But actually, even once she was back, he was doing a lot of looking after Timothy. The point I'm trying to make is, regardless of your views on it, Jim felt that these vacations and trips were becoming inappropriate.
Joe, I've always wondered, why did you stop gaming?
I loved it, but to be honest, I felt like the time that I was spending playing games should have really been spent working and therefore making money instead of playing games.
I've got something that's going to blow your mind.
What?
Well, basically, you can earn money by playing games just by using your phone.
How?
Well, it started when I started using Free Cash. Because if you use the link in the description to download Free Cash, what you can do is start to conduct your own games, you can do surveys, and all of these little activities will start building up small amounts of cash that you can then withdraw from the app.
Well, I'll be honest, I haven't done all that many of the surveys because I've been playing too many of the games. It's nostalgic. It's a bit of an itch that I've wanted to scratch playing all these games.
And this is the thing, if you can just now be on your phone, watching TV, switching off at night time and earn a bit of cash from your phone, then why wouldn't you want to do it? Now, what we will say is that this isn't a sort of magic cure-all thing that's you're gonna make thousands of pounds from, but it is an easy way to earn a little bit of cash while you're pretty much doing nothing else. And why we feel comfortable recommending it, having tried it ourselves, is because on Trustpilot they have a 4.7 rating, and over 60 million people have tried Free Cash, and they've paid out over $250 million in prizes and rewards. One thing that I've learned pretty quickly that you should do, a little recommendation from us, is that you should keep app tracking on, because it allows them to give the best offers, games and surveys for you, knowing your habits. And once you've played a few games, done a few surveys, you'll start building up the rewards and cash. And once you've been able to get over $25, you'll then be able to withdraw that cash into your accounts. And you can do that via PayPal, via Visa transactions, or even via Amazon gift cards, so you can get whatever you want in whatever way you feel comfortable to. So if you fancy getting a bit of cash, sitting at home, playing a few games and trying it like we have, why don't you use the link in the description below, or scan the QR code on screen right now. And when you completed your first offer, you'll get a $10 bonus on us. Big thanks to Free Cash for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back into it.
And shortly before Timothy's disappearance, Amy went on a cruise to the Bahamas with a friend, and this was kind of almost the straw that broke the camel's back for Jim. This was when Jim really started to say to her, listen, this needs to stop now. I'm not putting up with this. Like, I want to be on these holidays with you, or I don't think we should be going on them. As I say, it has been documented that the family had financial struggles and stuff like that. But worse than all of this, Amy was cheating on Jim. That's my opinion. Anyway, people can class it for whatever they want, but in my opinion, Amy was cheating on Jim. I don't believe that you need to have intercourse with another person to be cheating on your partner. I personally believe that if you are keeping secrets from your husband and the father of your child, and you are actively in contact with your first husband, someone that you were previously married to, I believe that's cheating, to be honest, even if you're just texting, calling and whatever. But Jim found out it was more than that. They had been meeting up. They had meeting up on several occasions, allegedly. And not only that, Amy had arranged for a future meetup with this man, and she had explicitly arranged it for when she knew that Jim would be away. Josh, am I being harsh here, or does that sound like cheating?
No, it doesn't. Look, an emotional affair is absolutely still an affair, and so I can completely understand the perspective there. What I will say is there's no necessarily irrefutable proof that she was having a physical affair with anyone, so we should just say that. But as you rightly say, it doesn't take much more than what is even been described or known to us publicly to say that it was an emotional affair. And again, do we know for certain that she was going away with the girls? That's the question to argue. So, if she wasn't and she was away, even if there wasn't anything sexual there, that's going away with someone that could be a potential love interest or partner. It's completely inappropriate. So you can completely understand why it would be cheating, and therefore you can completely understand why Jim may have wanted to confront her.
There you go, which is pretty much exactly what he did. And he didn't do what a lot of people would do, which is leave straight away. He gave her an ultimatum. He said, it's either that guy or me. And if it's me, you never have any contact with that guy again. Amy picks Jim in that situation, but Jim does lay some serious ground rules down, and he basically says to her, if you do want that guy, then that's fine, you can go to him, but I will battle for sole custody of Timothy. And I believe that Amy felt that if that situation was to arise, then Jim probably would be granted sole custody. Amy had attempted to end her own life on multiple occasions. She suffered with depression and was on medication, and despite being described as two peas in a pod with her son Timmy, some may argue that Jim was pulling his weight more as a parent. Anyway, the morning of May 11th, 2011 starts like any other morning in the Pitzen household. Normal routine, getting washed, getting clothed, having breakfast, and then Jim would drive Timothy to school. And Amy would also be in the car at the time, because Jim would then drop Amy to work afterwards. He dropped Timothy to school. Amy stayed in the car. Jim gets out the car, walks Timothy into school, and once he drops him into his classroom, he did something that I do every single morning, probably embarrassing my daughter every time I do it. But you wait outside, don't you? You wait outside, you look through the window and you're hoping, oh, come on, give your dad a look or whatever. Timothy turned, he looked at Jim, gave him a big beaming smile and I think a wave or a thumbs up. And that would be the last time that Jim ever saw his son Timothy Pitzen. Because once he drops Amy to work, she pulls a sickie, and within around 30 minutes or so after leaving her workplace, she's already gone back to Timothy's school. She tells the people at reception that she needs to take him out because of a family emergency. And then about an hour later, Amy takes her car to a garage to basically have it repaired. Now, when she's there, I don't know whether this was an arrangement or whether there was just a good Samaritan there or something like that. Basically, they tell her it's going to take quite a while. And what Amy then actually does is she manages to get someone from the repair shop to give her and Timothy a lift to a local zoo so that they can spend the day having fun. It would have been something that Timmy would have absolutely loved, seeing the animals, killing some time until the point when the car was repaired. And Josh, when the car was repaired, you're expecting her to...
Go on, tell me.
Well, go back home. Obviously, you would imagine. It'd be normal sort of time. You've picked Timothy up. Listen, bit weird maybe that she didn't tell Jim that she was going to do that. But again, at the same time, I've been in situations in life when you have these sort of spontaneous moments or, you know, especially with my children as well. Sometimes like, if I've been away from home, stuff like that, and I'm starting to feel a little bit like, oh, I haven't seen her enough. Or
you want to go give them a treat.
Yeah.
You want to do something fun.
You just want to go and do something really, really fun for them. And also, by the way, like the excitement of being pulled out of school as well. Like, do you remember that when you were a kid, you'd be thinking like, oh my God. So Timothy, by all accounts, by the way, by the accounts of the people that worked in the car garage and stuff like that, he was loving it. He was excited. He knew that he was about to have a lot of fun. And that is exactly what he did at the zoo. But hours later, when her and Timothy returned to that repair garage, Amy doesn't drive her car home. She doesn't return to Jim. Instead, she drives about 45 miles north to Illinois, where they check in to the Key Lime Cove Resort. CCTV picks up the pair holding hands, walking through the corridors, and again, no sign of distress. But in the meantime, Jim's panicking out of his mind. He does the school run, and to the shock of the teachers, when they look at him confused, he doesn't know that Timothy's already left with his mum. He immediately starts calling Amy's phone, but it's switched off. It's going to voicemail. He said he was calling at least once every single hour. And as the hours went on, he was getting more and more worried. He calls the police, but the police actually say to him, well, you know, the kid is with his mum, Jim, so maybe we should give it a little bit more time until we go and file that missing persons report. And actually, he had to wait around 24 hours after the first call to be able to do that. And it's not until that next day when he is filing that report, when Amy has already set off on the road once again, this time traveling about 160 miles to Wisconsin, where they check in to another resort. And this time it is a hotel with a water park in. So once again, it goes without saying, Timmy's going to be absolutely buzzing, having no idea that his panicked father and the police force were now looking for him. The next day is the last time that Timothy Pitzen is ever picked up on CCTV. And once again, nothing looked out of the ordinary. He's holding his mum's hand. They're walking through the corridors. It all looks fine. And as I say, Amy's phone has been turned off pretty much the entire time, right? But then on Friday the 13th of May, she turns that phone back on. She speaks to her mother and a couple of other relatives, and she actually calls Jim Pitzen's brother rather than Jim. And this is where I suppose the family would have gained a lot of comfort to know that Amy was okay. She was with Timothy. Jim's brother could actually hear Timothy in the background during that call, and he said he could hear him playing. He sounded fine. He said he was hungry, but not in a distressed way or anything like that. And he was definite from when he heard, "Mummy, I'm hungry," that was definitely Timothy. So at that point, we know that Amy is with Timothy. However, the context of the call with Jim's brother is concerning. She told him that Timmy was her child and that he belonged to her. And when he questioned her why she wouldn't get in touch with Jim, she grew confrontational and said to him, "What, you don't trust me?" She said, "I'm not going to hurt myself and I'm not going to hurt Timothy." But not long after that, Amy's phone is turned off again. She threw her phone behind a building in a fairly remote area, and later forensic tests on her vehicle showed that she had drove down a gravel road and parked up in a remote area. It said that she was there for a good few hours. And then at 7:30 that evening, Amy's picked up on CCTV once again. This time, she's in a different outfit. And this time, she doesn't have Timothy with her. She buys pens, paper, envelopes. She buys some chips and some milk. And she heads out of the store once again on her own. She's next actually seen checking into the Rockford Inn Hotel in Illinois. But the main question that everyone will have right now is, who's with Timmy? Where is Timothy Pitzen?
Now, it wasn't for another 30 hours until we get the next important moment in this case. And while they didn't find Timmy, they did, unfortunately, find Amy. Because a housekeeper at the Rockford Inn went to clean room 108. She couldn't actually get into the door because it was locked from the inside with the security chain across it. But she was able to unlock it, peer inside through a narrow gap, and what she saw in there completely horrified her. And that's because the deceased body of Amy could be clearly seen through that narrow gap. The housekeeper calls the police immediately. They flood on the scene and they try to ascertain what had happened to Amy.
Do you know initially, right, when that housekeeper saw the scene, I don't know this for fact, but she must have thought that it was a murder scene.
Yeah, she must have. Yeah, because basically, for context for everyone watching, it was an incredibly gory scene. There was red absolutely everywhere, and it didn't look like it was a self-deletion attempt.
It looked, and what transpired would actually be that there were sort of multiple attempts within that attempt. I think that Amy had maybe planned a certain way to go, and that way hadn't transpired in the way that she had wanted it to, which meant that in different areas of the room, the bathroom, there was a lot that would have shocked and stayed with that housekeeper. Yeah,
and this is the thing, like, I think what the police were able to ascertain pretty quickly is sometime in the evening of the 13th or the morning of the 14th, Amy had attempted to self-delete. Now, she had done this, they found out later on, through a combination of things. So she had taken a lethal dose of antihistamines. By the way, Joey, I didn't even know that you could take a lethal dose of antihistamines. What? Antihistamines are basically, as far as I'm aware, sort of like allergy medication.
Right.
So I didn't even, we're not experts obviously on this case. I'm not sure. We're not experts on this, but then she'd also used a box cutter to slit her own wrist.
Yeah, that was in the bath, right? So I think that she had planned to go in the bath, bleed out or whatever. It looked, and the police and detectives kind of ended up theorizing that it just didn't happen quick enough for her. And therefore she actually got out of the bath and did the same thing with the box cutter, this time to her neck. And that was where she was actually found, in the bedroom.
It's absolutely horrific. And what police then did is obviously look into the toxicology reports to try and ascertain whether she was on any other substances or illicit drugs before ascertaining what had actually happened to her. And what was clear is that there wasn't any other substances in her system.
And that is somewhat of a concern, actually, that there weren't other substances in her system, because Amy was on medication that was prescribed to her from a doctor, and that medication had been something that, in the Pitzens family's eyes, had been something that had helped her with her struggles with mental health in the past and depression.
So obviously, police then look at the rest of the scene and they were able to identify that box cutter and actually take some DNA and other readings from it. And we'll go into those in a little bit. But what else did they find at the scene? Well, there was also a bottle of children's liquid cold and cough medicine, as well as Timothy's child identification card, a green cloth bag, a purse, and a photo of Timothy. There was also a t-shirt that was purchased for him at Brokerfield Zoo on Wednesday, the 11th of May. But most terrifyingly, there was no other sign of Timothy. So police now started even more that search for the missing person. But it wasn't just those items, because they also found a note next to Amy's body. And that note wasn't what we thought it was, which was a self-deletion note. Instead, it was an apology to the hotel staff that would go and identify and find her in the first place. So police didn't actually have a note identifying the reason why she wanted to end her own life.
That's bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. And I know that we've just said, like, what a traumatic experience it must have been for the hotel maid to have found a body, and a body in such a gruesome state that, as I say, looks like a murder scene, to be completely honest with you. However, the reason I find it baffling is usually when people are at that point in their final moments, they're really not thinking about the person that's probably going to find them, hotel staff, stuff like that. And when you think about the insensitivity, obviously, towards Timothy's father and his family and those that would never know about him again, I find it weird how you can have that lack of empathy and sensitivity towards those people who have been in your life for years, yet you have the sensitivity to, you know, write a note to the maid and apologize. I just, for me, it just doesn't make sense, Josh.
It doesn't. I think what was clear from this is that there was definitely something going on in the relationship between her and Jim, because not only did she not leave a note next to her, you know, saying anything to her partner, Jim, but also she didn't even send a note to him afterwards, because the thing that we actually found out after this was that there were two other notes. In fact, this time, rather than being next to her, they were actually posted. They arrived 2 days after Amy was found. And those were actually posted to her mother, as well as her best friend, Liz. And basically, to summarize those notes, actually says Amy wrote that Timothy was safe and was being cared for by people who would love and care for him, but that he would never be found. Amy expressed severe anger towards her husband, Jim, calling him a loser and various other very derogative terms.
She did call him a loser, and she did use a lot of derogatory terms. She didn't accuse him of much, though, did she? She didn't say that he was violent with her.
No.
She didn't say that he was violent towards Timmy. She may have stated that she feared for Timmy being left with Jim, but there wasn't anything in terms of so much as an accusation, was there?
No, there wasn't. But what I would say is there were certain veiled language, elements of language being used in this. And there was a quote particularly that she said to her mother, which read, "I can't take the chance of Jim hurting Tim because of my choices." So again, Jim hurting Tim does, for me, indicate that there may be some form of abuse.
I don't. Again, whose track record speaks more likely to have been someone to have done that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In terms of, I can't take the choice. That to me, I'm sorry, that to me sounds like a woman who's going through a psychotic episode, who is thinking, God, my actions could do this. Show me some witness testimony. Show me the police being called to the house one time for a domestic. Show me something like that, and maybe there'd be more weight to it. The fact is, there has never been any evidence that Jim Pitzen did anything to hurt his son, Timothy.
And by the way, there's two ways of understanding that quote. Hurting can be obviously physical, which is what, I've alluded to, or it could also be, mental. It could be, he's hurting his feelings. He's not looking after him. He's not being a good dad. And therefore that is what she may have meant, but we will never really know what she actually meant.
100%. You make a very good point there. I'm only speculating. Maybe I'm putting two and two together and getting five.
Yeah. I think what investigators were particularly worried about is that she had feared that she would lose custody of Timmy because of her mental health history and basically her behavior around the time. So it would meant that Jim would have had a very good case to be able to claim sole custody. And as we've said at the start of this episode, Amy was so infatuated, so in love with this young boy that she couldn't possibly imagine a world without him. And that's particularly concerning when you start thinking of that term of phrase, having to live without him, and she can't possibly imagine it. And that is potentially a route that might have happened in this case. And speaking of that, the most important and most debated section of Amy's notes is that Timothy was somewhere safe. And I think we should probably wait a little bit, Joey, and discuss those potential theories later, because going somewhere safe might not necessarily mean that you're alive and well and being looked after.
With people who love him. May not necessarily mean people who love him and are currently alive on planet Earth.
Exactly that. Now, I've told you what they found in the hotel room, but why don't I also tell you, Joey, about what they didn't find in the hotel room? Because Timothy's Spider-Man backpack, his toys, including all of his Hot Wheels and his Wild Republic toy truck, and all of his spare clothes were not there. And what also wasn't there was Amy's clothes when she was checking out of the Kalahari Resort, and also her iPass transponder. And that transponder is basically a way of paying for toll roads, I think, basically within that sort of local area. So it's actually a way of sort of, I suppose, tracking your movements, because you've got to go through a particular road at a particular time. And she didn't actually have that on her around this period. So obviously, from now on, a huge multi-state effort started to find Timothy, and it was conducted by various police agencies. And I think it's key to remember that the motel was actually 65 miles away from the Pitzen family home. And Amy had actually gone on, as we've said, a wide road trip across multiple different areas. So the search zone was very large indeed. It was very difficult for the police to even know where to start. So to narrow down the physical search area, police actually tracked the pings from Amy's cell phone during the afternoon of May 13th, where she made several calls to family members to tell them that Timothy was safe, as Joey's gone through. And while they were doing that, police also went through Amy's Ford Expedition to try and find any forensic evidence. And what they found in this vehicle is really, really concerning, because on the back seat of that vehicle was a large pool of dried blood. Now, you might immediately be going, Joey, well, that's open and shut case. If there's a pool of dried blood, then obviously it belongs to Timothy.
Yep.
Well, the fact of the matter was they actually searched this vehicle. They went through the DNA analysis, and the blood was from Timothy. So again, if I'm the police at this point, I'm going, well, obviously something serious has happened here, whether a murder, an assault, whatever. Timothy's hurt.
Yep.
Timothy's in grave danger. Timothy could have passed away. And that is what I thought the police would have identified. And I think that's what they initially thought upon discovering this pool of blood. But the Pitzen family came out and gave them a piece of information that they didn't expect would be coming. Basically, they said to the police that Timothy had been experiencing various different nosebleeds for the course of about 12 to 18 months. And these nosebleeds apparently were severe enough to cause sometimes a pool of blood to form.
Yeah. It's coincidental. If you look at how often he was experiencing them, if you look at how often he was probably experiencing them, I do think it's very coincidental. I think it's worth noting that Jim Pitzen himself has gone on record and kind of stated his belief that blood was from a nosebleed.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm not going to go against a father's instinct. At the same time as saying that, I find it highly, highly, highly coincidental that it just so happened that during this trip, that's when Timothy suffered with one of these nosebleeds.
Yeah. And what's therefore interesting to say is that they also did the forensic test, as I've just said, on the box cutter as well.
The box cutter that Amy used for the wrists and...
Exactly that. Now, they looked into that and they went, well, potentially this pool of blood could have been connected to that and therefore identified the box cutter itself. And the thing is that Timothy's blood wasn't on the box cutter. So that wouldn't have been a weapon that would have been used against him.
It definitely wasn't the cause of why there was the blood in the car.
Exactly that. But the cops didn't just stop there with their forensics. They then went and looked at the vehicle in more detail as well. And Joe's already said this, but they actually were able to identify an area in which they thought the vehicle may have been. And I couldn't believe how they were able to identify this. Basically, what they do is they look on the underside of the vehicle. Now, as you can imagine, she's driven 65 miles just to get to this motel, let alone all of the other driving that she's meant to be doing during this time. I would expect there to be contamination, there to be lots of different things going on, there to be various different surfaces identified from underneath this car. You can imagine just driving along the motorway in the UK, there's various things that are on a motorway that could be polluting it, that could be getting in the way, that could be identified, misidentified, whatever, right? But the police went through this forensics. They were able to identify quite specifically that the vehicle had been in an off-road location, potentially by an amount of water, like a stream, a creek or a pond, something like that. And they were also able to identify that the vegetation around this, so sort of the grass and the flora and fauna that was actually underneath the vehicle, was from a sort of unkept area of land. It wasn't something which it was a backyard or a piece of farmland that would have been cultivated. It was longer grass that was basically unmown in any way.
It was from a very sort of remote area. And being that it was a very remote area and it was very far away from her house, you would imagine it was a remote area that not many people, including Amy Fry-Pitzen, would have ever been to, Josh, wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly. So again, it doesn't quite make sense from that perspective. But when you look at this forensic evidence, you might go, well, there's a large area now. Perhaps with this level of information, we can start looking at riverways, waterways, ponds, creeks, and maybe the area is shortened. But because they were looking at such a vast zone, even with this amazing level of forensics, I don't think it particularly helped them sort of zone in on where they should go. Now, as you say, Joey, it doesn't take a criminal genius to sort of say, this has got all the hallmarks of going to a remote location to potentially dispose of something.
Yep.
Does it?
No.
I think you don't have to be working in the FBI to say that evidence underneath the car is very concerning if you're going down the theory that Timothy is still alive.
With the context of the blood in the car, I think it's more than concerning. I think that you're drawing to conclusions, really.
So they're still searching away. They're still trying to find Timothy. And next, the investigators moved to Amy's background and exposed a highly calculated pre-planning of that day, proving that it wasn't a sudden, impulsive act. And that's because, Joey, they found that Amy had a Yahoo email account. They started going through all of this information and they tried to find out who she may have been contacting in the days before this missing person case started. Now, they went through that Yahoo account and all of the emails were deleted. And I couldn't believe this, Joey, with all of the ways that people can track themselves online these days and how everything is being run through and all of the information is being sourced. But they weren't able to recover those deleted emails on that Yahoo account. So whatever happened, inbox and outbox, they never were able to identify who she'd been speaking to.
They were able to determine, though, that there had been activity off of it. It wasn't, for example, an email she had set up and then it had just been left and hadn't been touched or whatever, because they were able to distinguish that things had been deleted, and that therefore leaves you with the certainty that there were some sort of dealings within that Yahoo account. And they also actually were able to determine the date of when she had been deleting this sort of stuff. And it was shortly before she took the trip with Timothy. Exactly. So it wasn't just that either that I couldn't believe, Joey. The police were also able to identify that she had made 2 dry runs is actually the only way that we can really describe these. Basically, she'd gone out to remote locations 2 times. These runs were actually done in February and March of the same year. And police were able to identify that she'd done those, and they were very out of character. These weren't places that she would often frequent. These weren't places that she really knew, but they were places that very much stuck out in her daily routine, and police were very concerned about why she was doing these. So while all of this is going on, hundreds of dogs, police helicopters, and various other volunteers were searching the local area to try and find Timmy. But the next break in the case didn't come until the autumn of 2011, when a passerby identified a phone, picked it up off the ground, and kept it on their mantelpiece for years. She actually only turned it into the police in 2013, 2 years after Timothy had disappeared. And she only did that because her brother had gone through the contacts and said that it was very suspicious and remembered the press coverage of this case. And sadly, even after going through the phone, the police were unable to find any other links to Timothy. And so even that was a dead end. So for years after this, the search continued, and Jim, Timothy's father, still held hope that he'd be able to find Timothy alive. The family definitely did. I followed this case pretty much from the start, Josh.
Yeah.
And I didn't really hold out that sort of hope. I think that I was pretty certain after a couple of months or whatever what I felt had happened to Timothy, given the circumstances and everything we've spoke about here. But then one day in 2019, something pretty extraordinary happens, doesn't it? Because this is when a young man is walking the streets of Newport, Kentucky. He looks confused, agitated, worried. Apparently he's bruised at the time. And he eventually flags down a car. And he tells the driver of that car that he's just escaped. He's run over a bridge and that he has been being held by a couple of bodybuilder type guys. Most importantly, this man claims that he is Timmothy Pitzen. Obviously, the police arrive pretty much immediately. He gives Timmothy Pitzen's date of birth. There are actually people, because there's been a little bit of a commotion here, right? And this is at the time when camera phones are around and whatever. There are people that already start uploading very grainy images to the internet that they had taken of this man in a car park in Kentucky. And it was already going around the internet that Timmothy Pitzen could have potentially been found. He told the police that he had been handed from person to person, abused, and that he had finally now made his escape from 2 men who were bodybuilder types who had distinctive tattoos. I think he said one had a snake on his arm and the other had a spider on his neck. But when this young man gets back to the station, he refuses to have his fingerprints taken, Josh. What are you thinking if you're the police officer officer at that time.
Well, I suppose you have a right to not give your fingerprints.
Yep.
But obviously, if you're linked to a particular case and could be really serious, you're going, well, that feels really weird.
At the same time, I think that maybe police officers would have thought that the responses of Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, the girls that were kept captive by Ariel Castro, they may have found that behaviour a little bit weird at first.
We saw it also in the Elizabeth Smart case as well. She also didn't want to be found.
Very good point to make there. Elizabeth Smart denied to the police that she was Elizabeth Smart. So I don't think at this point all hope is lost because he hasn't given his fingerprints. But the officers did say that he didn't look 14, which is the age that Timmy would have been, I believe, by that point. They thought that this man looked more like he was in his early 20s. And they actually started asking him a few questions that they had already had prepared in the eventual potential outcome that Timothy was one day found, or that someone was found who claimed to be Timothy. And one of those questions were about family pets, and this wasn't something that prior to this had ever been in the media. They asked him if he had any pets as a kid. He said he didn't. He said he didn't have any pets, but Timothy had a dog that he loved, as well as, I believe, a cat. Eventually, the DNA test does come back, and it confirms that this man is not Timothy Pitzen. It is 23-year-old Brian Reaney. He had been out of prison for less than a month after a burglary, and his rap sheet was pretty heavy. It ranged everywhere from petty crimes, I should say, like theft and burglary, all the way up to separate times where he had impersonated himself as a child, as a victim of abuse, and as someone that had been trafficked, and none of these were true. And that realization to Jim Pitzen must have been like a dagger through the heart. I watched an interview of his. He grew very emotional in this interview when he was speaking about the case, and obviously he said that there was that hope that after all these years, Timothy was going to be reunited with him. And then eventually the rug was very, very quickly pulled from under his feet. It's an awful situation.
It really is. I mean, ultimately, you want the book to be absolutely thrown at this guy for what he's done, because that pain that Jim had gone through in that moment, I don't think you can really comprehend it. And by the way, I'm sure there were other sort of cases where Jim gets his hopes up and hopes, that Timothy had been found. There are other small, instances, but this is probably the most well-known one. Yep. But what I'm trying to say is he would have had his hopes go up a little bit more in other occasions. Well,
I've actually watched a sit-down interview of himself, and he said that he had to contain his optimism a little bit at first because he had been in that situation before. Whether that be through someone actually coming out and claiming to the police that they were Timothy, maybe not. But he had been in situations where he had received tip-offs, things like that, and things that had given him cause for optimism. Optimism that his son was still out there. And an optimism, Josh, that he does still hold today.
Yeah.
Jim Pitzen believes that his son Timothy is still out there. And it really does lead me on to a very sensitive question, but one that I feel, listen, we know our viewers very well now. They're going to know what we think of this, what our opinions are. So I'm going to ask you the question, Josh. Do you believe Amy's claims that Timothy is safe and is with people who are caring for him?
I personally don't think that Timothy is alive. I think there is enough evidence to suggest that he's not. But before we go into that, can I give you the reasons why he may still be alive and what may have happened to him?
I would love to know why you think that I would love to know why you feel there are a possibility that he could still be alive, because I find it hard to get my head around.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the initial point that people have raised, because as you can imagine, and I'm sure a lot of you will be discussing this in the comments, and we'd love to know, by the way, what you think, because as we know, this is an unsolved case that we don't know the answers for. well. And so everything that we say right now will be speculative.
Yep.
Because we don't know the answers.
Of course.
And we're also not the police, so we don't have all of the physical evidence to be able to draw from. But what people have identified online, and especially within these Reddit forums that we've seen over and over again, by the way, if you've not followed Joe and Josh on Reddit, please do so now, because that is a good opportunity to do that.
There.
There's a lot of conversations about case, and we would love this conversation around this case to be started really there as well as the comments. But what I would say is people have said that his belongings and some of his sort of clothing and that sort of thing weren't in the motel room with Amy. And so they've basically said he may still be out there with his Spider-Man rucksack. He may still have his clothes that he was wearing on that day. And the fact that they weren't there with her would identify basically that they may still be with Timothy.
Yeah, I mean, if you were going to do some sort of handover, it's going to be even more distressing for your son to be taking his toys off him, his rucksack off him, things like that. So you would imagine that those things would be going with the child.
It's the sort of thing like, look, when you go out with your kids, you pack a rucksack, you put your sandwiches in there, they've got a bit of food, it's their regular thing, they carry it because it's their bag. And so again, that feels to me like it's something where it would have been seconded to him and potentially passed on to another person.
Okay, so I'd like you to answer me this. He takes the rucksack, she gives over his possessions and whatnot. How after all of these years has Timothy Pitzen then potentially never seen a picture of him, an appeal for himself, never had any information? Remember, this kid was, in fact, Josh, to bring another very well-known missing child into this isn't a Madeline McCann situation where you could potentially say, yeah, well, your memory probably wouldn't be there and probably would be erased. He was a little bit older. How on earth would have no one have found him in this time, in the day and age of the internet, in a day and age where if you want to go and get a traditional job in the United States, a lot of the time you're going to need some form of documentation. You want to go to university, you might need a birth certificate, things like that. In what circumstance could that have happened?
Well, I'm very glad you brought up that point, because what a lot of people have said is this was a very rural area. You've seen where he was supposedly dropped off. You've seen the motel. You've seen the location around it. People have described it very often as being very isolated, very few communities, not a lot going on in that area. But what they have identified is that there are Amish communities within that location. Now, for anyone in the UK that doesn't know what an Amish community is, effectively, they are a religious sect of Christianity, and basically they live their life pretty much I believe it's within the sort of 1800s range. So they don't have telephones. They don't have fridges. They certainly don't have, a TV or any means of communication on the internet, that sort of thing. So if Timothy had been seconded into a community like an Amish community, he would potentially never see an image of himself. He would never have access to 24-hour news coverage. He would potentially not even have access to a photograph of himself. So again, what people have hypothesized is that there were these communities around him, and therefore he may have been dropped off by his mother into these communities by someone that she'd got in contact with or known or been a friend of a friend. And therefore he could have been completely hidden from the outside world.
But how would she have got into contact with these communities? How would she have met the people or known the people when she was so far away from home?
Well, this is the thing, right? We've talked about this. She went on these dry runs. She did 2 different road trips where she went to this area and she basically spent time when no one else knew what she was doing to be able to sort of potentially plan out a proposed handover. This is what the people online are saying. They're saying that this was a handover. She met someone. Timothy then goes into the care of someone else, a new guardian within the community, like an Amish community, and was therefore looked after. Now, again, a lot of these zones that she's looked at don't even have cell service. So even if she was handing it over to someone that wasn't in an Amish community that had a cell phone, they wouldn't otherwise be able to track those locations. So again, it seems like she had been doing some form of research to be able to identify these areas. Now, the counterpoint to that is obviously those areas could easily have been an area in which she might have disposed of a body.
It could have been a burial site, my friend. It could well have been. The fact that you went somewhere and you knew it as a rural area could just as heavily indicate that you knew that could be a place. And I don't mean to sound insensitive here, but to hide a body. And ultimately, I do think that Amy Fry-Pitzen murdered her son. I think that in the letter, she stated that you will never find him. She seemed confident about that. Despite the nosebleed excuse, I think that it's too coincidental. I think you've got to look at the fact that there was blood in the back of that car, and you've got to be able to have some common sense to draw the conclusion that that blood in the circumstances is maybe more likely to be from violence. The woman was not in a fit state of mind. She had come off of her medication that, was prescribed to her. There are obviously very, very serious effects that can happen when you do those sort of things. And despite that Yahoo account never being recovered, she did have multiple devices, multiple phones, electronic devices, things like that, laptops that were seized. They were scoured through, and they didn't find anything to suggest that she had contact with anyone. We speak about the fact that she went to this area and there was Amish communities and Mormons and stuff like this, but no one's ever got any recollection of her ever connecting with them, and therefore she would have all had to have done it in secret. And the main thing for me, she walks back into that supermarket on her own without Timothy with a change of clothes. Why would you have changed those clothes? To me, I think you would have changed those clothes because you knew that you were going to be visible on CCTV, and those clothes may have been blood-soaked. They may have had evidence on them. I just think everything, unfortunately, points in the direction, as well as the fact that before she went into that supermarket, she spent roughly 3.5 hours in that wooded area. I think everything points towards Amy Fry-Pitzen murdering Timothy Pitzen.
And this is the thing, we still don't know the answers to this. It's still very much an unsolved case. Jim, his father, very much still believes that he's still alive and is clinging on to hope
so
he can be found one day.
We both very much do hope that is the case, and that my opinion's on it wrong, definitely.
Yep, 100%. So let us know what you think in the comments, because I know that a lot of you are hardcore true crime fans and you will have your own thoughts about this case, and we are fascinated to know what you think. Thank you so much for sticking around and watching another episode. And if you are enjoying our episodes, then this is a great time to subscribe. Roughly about 50% of people are subscribed, which means roughly about 50% of you aren't subscribed. Now, this would be a good time to do it. Hit the bell notification, get notified every time we upload a video. And remember to like this video if you enjoyed it as well.
Thank you so much, guys. I know that so many of you have suggested this case to us from the start of when we launched this channel, and it's been one that we've always really wanted to cover. And I want to shout out our members, because they have been the difference maker in us covering this video. When our members speak, we listen. They are pretty much responsible for all of our videos that we cover now, and they have their own blueprint on this channel. You kind of dictate what videos we make at the minute. So if you want to become one of those members who's able to put their suggestions across, you can join and become a member by hitting the link in the description. It is less than the price of a cup of coffee to become a member. So if not, and that's not for you, then please make sure you like, share the video. And on screen right now, you will see the disappearance of Elizabeth Smart. That may well be a video that you might want to watch of ours next. We love you all very much, and we will see you all in the next one.